So this isn't going to be a normal video. I'm gonna say that immediately. I'm not showing off anything, I'm not doing anything crazy cool, but I do have a presentation planned talking about how I really want Freddy Krueger to be changed, how I really think he needs a rework, why, and what I would do. I've gone on rants about this about 1,000,001 times. I've thought this for well over a year, maybe even two, honestly. And I used to play Freddy Krueger a lot. I still play him a lot. He's still one of my favorite killers. I just wish that he was better. And I have ideas. So sit back, relax, and here's the presentation. 1. This is the Freddy rework. This is my lovely little presentation, as you can tell by the little smile I added here. So this is the introduction, if you can't tell by intro. So there are different types of killers, I would say, in this type of game. We have our trapping killers. We have Trapper, We have killers like Onryo who teleport, and we have killers like the Pig who add some sort of alternate objective to the game, right? She has her bear traps, and you have to take them off at the puzzles. So what about Freddy? Where does Freddy Krueger land on this? Well, as I always say, knowledge is key, right? So let's quickly learn about demon power, right? Or what is it, Dream Demon? His power, that's what it's called. For starters, he has traps. This is his most significant thing, right? Maybe not his most significant, but it is the first thing that you think of maybe when you versus a Freddy Krueger, is the fact that he has traps he can place down. They're these little pools of blood that if you run into, all these arms will come out and they'll grab you and they'll slow you down a little bit. He also has his ability to teleport. He can teleport directly to generators. It plays this whole animation. It churgles, makes the generator throw up blood. It's really intimidating to see, He also has, I said no terror radius, but what I really mean is he has like this bit of a stealth mechanic in the sense of when he puts a survivor into dream state, they become oblivious and they can no longer hear his terror radius, but in turn it's replaced with a lullaby. He also has dream state, what I call the world event, and this also, to understand like the world event, I also would consider him an alternate objective, but we're just gonna throw this into one thing, just world event. The alternate objective would be the alarm clocks. When you're in dream state, when you're put in dream state, either by being hit by Freddy Krueger's basic attack, or by waiting around for 60 seconds, a whole minute, you will fall asleep and go into dream state. And when this happens, you can interact with one of those mentioned alarm clocks to wake yourself up. So what does all this have in common? The dream state. It all relies on dream state. The traps rely on dream state. You have to be asleep. You have to be in dream state to have the traps work. To teleport, you don't have to have survivors asleep in dream state, but it helps. It makes it so you can teleport a little bit faster. To get the oblivious effect, survivors have to be in dream state. To interact with the alternative objective, you have to be in dream state, right? So Freddy Krueger, I would argue, compared to other killers, has a lot going on. He's got a lot of things happening. And I would say, and even argue, he's got too much going on. He's got too many things happening. So, why is he a weak killer? Why is he usually so low on the tier lists that people will produce? And if Freddy Krueger is so weak, why does he have such a high kill rate? Well, these are things I want to explore in this presentation, in this video, that I decided to make a whole presentation for, right? Really showing off my autism and how much I've really overthought this, how much I've just put way too much thought and dedication into. I even made a whole forum post about it a couple months ago, and some of my opinions about it have changed. A lot of it's still the same though. So let's get into his abilities. We're going to start with his trapping. So his trapping, he has two different types of traps changed through add-ons. He has his snares, which are his default. They make it so if you step into this pool of blood, the arms come out, as I mentioned before, and they slow you down. They give you hindered effect. The pallets are fake. survivors can throw this pallet down and you can run right through it. You're not affected at all. So when you compare Freddy Krueger to other Trapper type killers, like literally Trapper and the Hag, the only two other Trapper killers, what are his pros and cons? Well, that's what I want to go through. So his pros. Well, for starters, he has two different types. And although they can change their trap in ways, they can't change it this drastically. This is two completely different traps. These are two completely different abilities. And I do think that, in a way, that puts him at an advantage, because he could bring either or if he really wanted to. He also doesn't have to stop and do an entire animation to actually place these traps. He usually places them on the go, which also makes it better for him to do this during a chase. These two have to do entire animations, so it's usually better if they say, hey, I want to lock this part of the map down, and they throw down a bunch of traps in this area, and they're like, okay, perfect. They have to have time to prep. Freddy Krueger doesn't. He usually is better off, in my opinion at least, to find a survivor, and while in chase, throws down the trap, and then at that loop, that's when the survivor hits it. And, not for nothing, in his most recent update, his most recent change, he can actually place these traps through objects, which he couldn't do before. If you were to go to a wall, right, Freddy Krueger can now do, that he has this advantage over these two, is he can go near the wall and place the trap on the other side of that wall, which is really nice, because if he continues to push that survivor that's like hiding right there, he could push him right into the trap. He could catch up just a little bit more, which puts him at an advantage over these two. So what are his cons? I mean, his traps sound great, right? It only slows survivors down, right? And this applies a hindered effect that doesn't last very long, in my opinion. Only lasts a few seconds. This will physically stop a survivor, and it's actually pretty useful for tricking survivors, in my opinion. But let's say we go up against a survivor that panic drops every pallet. They run over and they throw the pallet. All of a sudden they wasted a couple seconds in animation as you're catching right up to them, right? These two, although they don't have that, they have the ability to immediately land a hit, immediately gets an injure, and if you're on top of that survivor, you could go from healthy to grabbed. You could grab that survivor right then and there and hook them. That is huge. That is a lot. Another really negative thing is it's only useful if the survivor is asleep, meaning that either you as Freddy Krueger have already hit them, you already have needed to hit them, or 60 seconds have passed since that survivor last woke up, and now they're just in dream state. Those are the only times these are useful, because neither of them show up if you're awake. You can't interact with these at all if you're awake, which sucks a lot. And not for nothing, I mean, this is just a negative drawback of all trapping type killers, but a survivor that's paying attention could, in theory, destroy all your traps. Specifically the pallets. If you go up against a team that's communicating and they understand, oh, Freddy Krueger has this ability where he can put fake pallets down, and I think he's running that. Oh, well, look, here's a pallet that wasn't here before, but now it's here. Usually they'll just throw it, and usually they'll break it immediately. Which also brings up another interesting point. Why is he so high on the kill rate? It's because he's believed to be a noob stomper. In lower tiers, lower ranks, he is believed to demolish newer players. And in my opinion, that's very true. And you see it through things like this. People that play a lot of Freddy and that play him in higher MMR prefer this over the pallets. And that's because if a survivor knows what these are and knows to look out for them, chances are they will throw them down and they will break these before you get a chance to actually use them in chase. But newer survivors aren't going to know that. They either don't know about the ability, or they don't know if they should throw them, or they think maybe each pallet is fake and they have to break it all. Either way, I think it really shows between higher MMR and lower MMR the effects fake pallets can have in a match. So let's carry on to the next ability now, shall we? Teleportation. He has the ability to teleport directly to generators. This is a little bit of the animation that it looks like. Now here are 4 other teleporting killers that are in the game. We have the Hag, who teleports to her traps, she was mentioned before. Onryo, who we also mentioned, she teleports to her TVs, which is really nice. We have the Dredge, who teleports to lockers. And we have the Demogorgon, who teleports holes in the ground that he makes, right? Now, when we compare Freddy Krueger's ability to theirs, what are some pros and cons? Well, he can create almost immediate pressure, right? He still has a bit of what I call summoning sickness, right? Where he has to wait a while before he can actually teleport. Very similar to these two, right? These two have to actually place them first, but these two could, if they didn't have this cooldown, could teleport immediately, but they do. And so does Freddy. Freddy also has this bit of summoning sickness. So why do I still say he has immediate pressure? Because he teleports to generators. He goes where the pressure is needed. And he doesn't have to place anything, unlike the Hag and unlike Demogorgon. He doesn't have to hope that his locker or his TV is close to the generator he needs to go. He just goes to the generator that he needs to be at. It's really nice. He can also fake a teleport. And what I mean by this is he cancels it. When you teleport with Freddy Krueger, it plays this whole animation that you see here where he crawls out of the ground, he goes up, and then he like flicks his hand, and then you take control of Freddy Krueger in that spot and you go. So in a way, it's like there's 2 different Freddy Kruegers when you start teleporting. There's the one that you're playing, and then there's the animation that you're about to take control before this one disappears. However, with Freddy Krueger, you can fake this teleport. The other killers don't have this bit of animation that plays beforehand. Besides maybe with the exception of Onryo, but even then, you can't fake it. When you teleport to a spot, the TV plays a bit of an animation, and actually, come to think of it, Demogorgon's holes play an animation as well. But you can't fake them. They only start playing that animation when you start teleporting. And Freddy Krueger's, you can fake. And it's really nice if you're chasing a survivor who's paying a lot of attention, and you start running them to a generator, and you're like, okay, I'll fake a teleport. You start teleporting there, and what they see, oh man, there's a Freddy Krueger in front of me. He's about to teleport in front of me. I'm just going to immediately turn around and leave. And then you cancel it, and to which you smack the survivor who's now looking at the gen and not looking at you. It's really useful. It's, in my opinion, it's one of his strongest things. His teleportation as a whole, in my opinion, is one of his strongest abilities. So how can an ability this strong have cons? I mean, it's great, right? Well, for starters, it's slower. These two killers right here, their thing plays about instantly, right? The second you teleport, you teleport. And actually, it's the same with the Dredge too, but you have this whole have to slide across the map to actually get there. And you can actually pick up a decent amount of information along the way. You can actually see survivors and other points of interest between from where you were to where you need to go. The Demogorgon is actually similar. He does the same thing. But these two are instant. These two instantly show up. Freddy Krueger's has to do this whole thing with his hand where he pulls it up and all the survivors around the map can hear you teleporting. It's very slow. It's kind of painful to do. And another thing, slower to get back, right? It's slower to get the charges back to actually do it again. His takes 45 to 27 seconds. And the reason it takes base kit 45 to 27 is because for each survivor that's asleep, right, you actually get your ability back just a little bit faster, right? 15% faster per survivor. And if all 4 survivors were asleep from the second that you teleported to the second that you got your ability back, it still takes 27 seconds to get back. To put it in retrospect, Demogorgons, who has the second longest, only has to wait 10 seconds. That's crazy. That is a huge difference between 45 to 10 seconds. And when we compare it to these 3, it's even worse. Dredge has a cooldown of, I believe, 3 to 4 seconds. Onryo technically doesn't have a cooldown, but she does have to de-manifest to teleport again. Because when you teleport, you manifest, so you can get an immediate hit. And Hag really doesn't have a cooldown. If 2 different survivors set off 2 different traps, you could teleport to one and then immediately teleport to the next. So Freddy Krueger has this unnecessarily long cooldown to get his ability back. It's ridiculous. And finally, and this is like something that it blows my mind that more people don't talk about this, you can't teleport to a finished generator. Blows my mind. It really does. The reason why this bothers me so much is because as the match progresses, and it's going to progress, you lose out on your ability to teleport. You teleport less. And the worst part of it all is when all the generators are finished, you can't teleport anymore. He's the only killer where you have an ability to do something, and because the survivors are playing the game normally, you lose out entirely on that ability. It's not like pinheads where, oh man, we're keeping up on the box so you can't use the box. Whatever. You still have to use time to get rid of it. This is just survivors playing the objective, and then you lose out on an ability because they played the objective. Something else to keep in mind, I've always thought that Freddy Krueger was especially good at 3-genning, because if there were 3 gens, right, and they don't have to necessarily be close to one another, but it's better if they are, you could find a generator that someone's on, teleport to it, and push them off, and you could kind of chase them for a while before you're like, okay, I need to get back to the generators. If you were to do that to a survivor and have no one asleep, it takes 45 seconds. By the time you get your teleport back and then you teleport to a gen, it takes, what, 2 survivors to cut a 90-second gen almost in half? They would have to finish it, they'd have like 50 seconds. They would get that whole gen almost done by the time you got your ability to teleport back and that you actually teleported back to that generator. That gen would be almost done. So on to the next ability, Stealth, right? His Oblivious effect. I didn't necessarily grab killers that had Oblivious effect. I did grab killers that had elements of Freddy Krueger's stealth, right? So I chose Onryo because she's got like the passive phasing as well as just the no terror radius. I mean, she's a pretty decent stealth. She's not like amazing at it, but she's okay. Then I grabbed Spirit because she has passive phasing as well. As you chase a survivor, it can be kind of hard to track where she is, right, in a chase. And then finally I grabbed Huntress because of Freddy Krueger's lullaby, his non-directional lullaby. So what are his pros, right? What are his pros and cons as we keep doing? Well, he has a passive phasing for survivors that are awake, which goes 16 meters and beyond, right? If you are further than 16 meters, you get this phasing thing, and it's kind of hard to track where he is. It's really nice against, going back to it, newer players, right? Maybe I shouldn't say really nice. I did say good-ish right here, and I do think it's good-ish, even for newer players, because they might think maybe they like just saw something, or, oh man, I can't really tell if he's headed to me or if he's headed to someone else. But at 16 meters is where you become solid anyways, so the passive phasing is eh. And you'd have to be able to actually see Freddy Krueger from 16 meters away to have that even happen. Another pro is the fact that when survivors are asleep, instead of hearing the terror radius, you get a non-directional lullaby. So it can be kind of hard to track where he is, especially for newer players that can't pinpoint exactly where he's coming from. And even some experienced players still get tripped up by this. So his stealth, although it isn't great, it's okay, you know, it's decent. So what are some cons? Well, for starters, he has a lullaby. Why does he have a lullaby? The other killers that have lullabies usually have lullabies because they have some sort of ranged attack. Freddy Krueger doesn't have a ranged attack. Why does he get a lullaby? It makes no sense. And when you compare him to other stealth killers, they lose their red stain when they're stealthing. Freddy Krueger doesn't, right? Because he gets rid of a... Because he doesn't become insidious, instead he puts on Oblivious effect on survivors. So he still has his red stain, and he still has his lullaby. And the worst part of it all is you lose out on terror radius perks. If you're running perks to either reduce your terror radius, if you're running perks to make it so your terror radius does something significant, you lose out on that on survivors that are asleep. It doesn't work on them. If I was to run something like Dark Devotion, hit the Obsession, and then drop Chase, it wouldn't work, right? The idea of dark devotion is hit the obsession and drop chase, because obsession will think you're chasing them, and other survivors that hear the terror radius are going to think, oh, he's still chasing obsession, whatever. That doesn't necessarily work. Although you could hit the obsession and then have the teammates get fooled by the terror radius. That's if those teammates are even asleep and if the obsession runs to those teammates. So I feel like, although it's cool, and it's definitely cool to hear the lullaby, overall, this is a bad thing. This is just a really bad thing. It kind of messes up all stealth elements that you could potentially have with Freddy Krueger because he has a lullaby for no reason. Then finally we have World Event, which is just Dream State as a whole, and it's the alternative objective of the alarm clock. So this is what it looks like when you're in the Dream State as a survivor. It kind of looks like a hyper armor from Halo, with this little glow about you. And then we have the actual alarm clocks that you have to interact with in order to get rid of the Dream State, right? So I'm comparing him to 3 other killers that have this kind of world event or alternative objective right here. You know, we have Pinhead, who I think is probably the most comparable, where if a survivor doesn't interact with the box, everyone on the map gets a chain hunt and will literally pull survivors off of their objective until someone else picks up the box and tries to solve it. There's also the Dredge, who has his Nightfall, real big terror type. Eventually, just no one can really see the map. And then we have the Pig, where you have to do some sort of alternate objective. You have to solve the puzzle box if you have a bear trap on your head. Similar to the alarm clocks, like you have to go do it or else. So what are some pros versus cons, you know? Well, for starters, there's the obvious ones, where if a survivor is in dream state, you can actually use your traps. And for each survivor that's in dream state, you get your ability to teleport 15% faster. It's really nice, right? You also get the non-directional lullaby, which can throw some survivors off. I would argue newer players much more than more experienced players, although that sounds very obvious now that I say it. You can also see survivors easier with this little blue glow. If survivors are trying to hide in some bushes, you see the glow and it gives them away every time. But the map looks brighter for Freddy Krueger. Just overall, it's just brighter all the time. So what about some cons? Well, for starters, it's really easy to get out of. There are 3 ways to get out of this. Either you use the alarm clocks, which gives you 30 seconds of invincibility to dream state. So if Freddy Krueger hits you after you use an alarm clock, you don't fall asleep, you just take damage, right? Other survivors that are awake can actually wake you up by clicking their fingers and slapping their hands, clapping their hands. And finally, and this is honestly my least favorite part of it, is if a survivor misses a skill check, they wake themselves up. If they are working on a generator and they miss a skill check and the generator pops, they wake up. If 3 survivors are working on a generator and one of them misses a skill check, 3 of them wake up. It's ridiculous, which makes it very easy to get out of. You could argue, oh, well, if they pop a gen or they do this, Freddy Krueger knows what they are, which is true, but it's not like he can get to them and use his ability. He has to M1, which sucks. It's not like he can sneak up on them. Oh yeah, he has the phasing from 16 meters or further away. Also, not for nothing, but your traps depend on survivors that are asleep. If they're awake, you can't use your traps, right? And again, to reiterate, terror radius perks are just not good with dream state because of the lullaby. I feel like it's just a big drawback. So I guess after all this, what are my recommendations? What would I do differently, right? I think he needs big core differences. I think he needs big changes. I feel like there's a lot of like little niche things that you could do, but if they were to tweak those too much, because of how many abilities he has, he would eventually become too strong, right? So I feel like he needs some big fundamental changes. So I say simplify his power, buff the hell out of his stronger abilities, make Dream State an actual threat. Right now, it doesn't feel like a threat. How old Freddy Krueger worked, not for nothing, but I want to mention it. Old Freddy Krueger, if you were asleep, you worked on generators slower. It sucked. It made Dream State a threat. You wanted to stay out of Dream State because that was the only time where Freddy Krueger could actually damage you, which was terrible. That was so bad. right then and there, he could be comparable to Michael Myers, who also is a very problematic killer. So I feel like in simplifying his power and buffing his other abilities, you'd make him more comparable to simple killers, right? And then this is just as a consequence of doing this. You'd have to change his add-ons, which I already kind of have opinions on it now, but I don't really want to get into that. So right here is how I'm going to try to give you an example of what I mean by simplify and buff, and you're really going to have to stick with me on this. You could, and this is just the example, you could get rid of alarm clocks, right? And then you could buff his teleporting. This would help newer players out as they wouldn't worry too much about alarm clocks. And more experienced players it could hurt because it could make it a little harder to leave it, right? And as for the teleporting, what you could do is make it so when the generators are finished, you could teleport to gate, which sounds really broken, but I really don't think it would be. Because in this way, you'd still be able to use his teleport. Now, this isn't what I would do. I feel like these are like, you know? I think these would be bad changes. This is what I would do. I would get rid of his ability to teleport. He doesn't need it, right? Which sounds crazy. You're gonna have to really bear with me because I did say earlier that I do think it's its strongest ability, and I still think that, right? But I think they should get rid of it to focus on his other, better attributes. So I would buff Dream State, right? There's a couple different ways, and I'm gonna explain a little bit. I'd want to make it kind of comparable to the Dredge, maybe even more so Pinhead now that I think about it, because Pinhead, you have to purposely ignore your objective to solve the box to help your team. And I'd want alarm clocks to kind of feel like that. What I'm thinking they could do is they could make it so for each survivor that's asleep, you get some sort of penalty. Not just, oh, Freddy Krueger can teleport faster, but you as a team get some sort of penalty. And if all 4 survivors are asleep, that's when you're like, okay, one of us has to wake up. This is getting kind of bad. This would also wrap into the devs wanting survivors to use these more. When they added the ability to make it so you're immune to dream state 30 seconds after using one of these, it's because they wanted survivors to use alarm clocks more often. But I think they focused on the wrong thing. I don't think they should have focused on alarm clocks. I think they should have focused on dream state. Which brings me to dream snares, right? I'd want to buff this up. I'd want to buff up his dream snares. We don't have a lot of trapping killers. I would love if Freddy Krueger got to stay as a trapper, right? So how would we do this? I'd want him more comparable to Nemesis, right? How he works, how his tentacle works, is if he hits a survivor that isn't infected, they become infected, and then when he hits the survivor with the tentacle, they start taking damage. I want something similar with Freddy Krueger's snares, right? If a survivor that's awake steps into a snare, they don't get hindered, but they fall asleep. They either fall asleep or they start falling asleep faster. And then when they're asleep, then when they start stepping into the snares, that's when they start getting hit with that hindered effect. And what I'm thinking they could do for each survivor that's asleep, the hindered effect is bigger. So if there's only one survivor that's asleep, they step into the snare, and it's how it is now. It's like, okay, I mean, you're a little slower. And then 2, it's slower, 3, it's slower, and then 4, you're practically stopped. And then for the stealth mechanic or the oblivious effect, personally, what I would do, I know I put this symbol here, but what I mean is I would get rid of oblivious effect, I'd knock it down. I would make lullaby, where if you're just asleep, you just hear the lullaby, just turn down, you just hear it all the time, whatever. So then now in dream state, you can hear the terror radius. And what I would do is for survivors that are awake, the terror radius is reduced. Not by a lot, but just by a bit. I'm thinking you could literally knock it down to 28 meters, maybe 22 meters, considering the fact phasing ends at 16 meters, right? When we think about that, it ends at 16 meters. Why isn't the terror radius also reduced? You can already kind of make out where he might be coming from. You look over, oh, there's Freddy Krueger, he's just phasing kind of in and out. And something else to keep in mind as well is the fact that without survivors in dream state, you are an M1 killer, right? With the ability to teleport until there's no more gens left. So I think to help fix him out, he would need some sort of terror radius thing, some sort of reduced terror radius, so he could try to get a jump on survivors that are still awake, right? Especially if they weren't to buff the snares to make it so it worked a bit like Nemesis. Because otherwise, you have to chase a survivor for either a minute, or probably even less than a minute, but you'd have to chase them for a while before they fall asleep, and or you have to actually hit them once. To use your ability, you have to hit them once and put them in sleep, and then you can use your ability, which is already, I would argue, fairly niche. And I know I didn't really put a symbol here, but that's because I didn't really think about it until now. But what they could do to pallets is they could make it so when you throw the pallet on, you also change what Dream State does. You make it so Dream State does something else that doesn't hinder survivors. Maybe it like does some sort of passive thing like with Doctor, where there's just more pallets being passively placed or something like that, you know? So what I guess my overarching theme of this is make Dream State a threat. That's the biggest thing I'd want. It would help make survivors want to actually use the alarm clocks. It would make it so putting survivors asleep actually felt worth it and not just like, oh, well, I can slow them down a little bit. And like, I don't know, just the thought of reducing the clutter could help a lot too. Clutter being all these unnecessary abilities. They could even, if they wanted to, just get rid of pallets and then give him some sort of different add-on that could help buff this up or buff this up, you know? So in conclusion, I think Freddy Krueger has a lot going on. I think he has too much going on, and I think he's a weak killer. I think if they were to keep him the way he is and try to buff him up, it would only make him too strong. But if they keep him the way he is, he's too weak. I feel like what they really should do is simplify his abilities and then make Dream State a threat. Make it so that survivors have to wake themselves up. They have to use the alarm clocks. They have to keep someone awake. They have to miss skill checks. They have to do something. If you make it a threat, it'll be good. He will be a better killer. But I suppose, as always, I need to hear your guys' opinion on it. I didn't really get much feedback in the forums, but that's okay. Give it a like, share the video. I do want to get some clips for TikTok and share it on that too and see people's reactions. But I suppose I'll see you in the next video.